Welcome back to the InfoSec and Nosen Show. Today, Kristen Espinosa joins us. One of the most underrated skills in InfoSec, and perhaps in life in general, is communication. Whether it's part of a social engineering exercise or communicating risk to your client at the end of an engagement, or even just communicating with your spouse, having the ability to convey a message in a way that will be heard is paramount, and often easier said than done. My three main takeaways from our conversation were: 1, why we need to stop listening for agreement and instead look for insights. 2, how acknowledging yourself plays a critical role in your ability to recognize others' achievements. And 3, the advantages of monotasking versus multitasking. You'll enjoy those two things, plus a bunch of other tips along the way. Direct support for this podcast comes from BreachSense, the data breach monitoring platform. More details can be found at breachsense.io. And now, here's my conversation with Kristen. Kristen Espinosa, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Josh. Happy to be here.
Thanks for coming. So, can you tell the listeners a bit about who you are?
Yeah, I am Kristen Espinosa. I had a company, Alpine Security. I started it in 2014 and sold it in 2020 to Cerberus Sentinel. So I'm currently working with them as a managing director. I wrote a book. It's a bestseller book, The Smartest Person in the Room. And that was released in February. And I've got quite a bit of positive feedback on that. I think I have 100 and something reviews on Amazon now. It's also an Audible version of it. My career has primarily focused on cybersecurity. I graduated from the Air Force Academy and started in the military doing cybersecurity in the early 90s. And I've been doing it, my whole career. So it's almost been 30 years now. And I've had various roles from military to defense to commercial to pen testing, aircraft to make sure hackers can't hack into an aircraft while it's flying or at the gate, and just quite a bit of in-depth experience spanning various areas in cybersecurity and leadership.
Very cool. So one of the things I want to focus on today is the communication aspect, which is kind of, I guess, it's a soft skill, but it's one of those things that if you don't have that right, then it doesn't really matter. Like, you can be the best pen tester or red teamer, and if you can't communicate the risk, then the decision makers will never actually give you the resources to fix the issue if you haven't communicated properly. So one of the things you talk about in the book is there are 7 steps. Can you explain those a bit?
Yeah, in the book I have a 7-step, I call it the secure methodology. And the 7 steps are designed to help anyone really improve their people skills or life skills or interpersonal skills. Step 1 is awareness. And we all have blind spots, for instance. And I talk about blind spots and how we have strong programs that run in our brain that take strong neural pathways. And there's often a trigger. And we don't realize it, but our brain has this program, and it's often like malware that automatically runs based on the trigger. And from an awareness perspective, if we have awareness of that, we can hit a Control-C and sort of stop it. And run a different program in our brain, which will start out weak, but as the more you run that new program or that new behavior, the stronger it will become, and the weaker the old one will become. So from awareness perspective, it's extremely important not just to be aware, but also to be able to do something about it.
So can you give me an example of being aware of what exactly?
Aware of a couple things of how you interact with the world, for instance. Like from a cybersecurity perspective, one of my defining moment kind of about why I wrote the book was one of my penetration testers was going over with me, debriefing me on how a report review session went with the client. And he kept telling me that the client just didn't get it. Meaning the client did not understand the severity of what we were telling them, nor did they understand how to fix what we told them. And if that person, my engineer, my pen tester, had awareness, he would have realized a couple of different things. Number one, it's our job to make sure the client gets it, because if they don't get it, they're not going to be able to, become more secure. And then number 2, as the client was communicating with this person, there were things the client was saying throughout the conversation that would have given my engineer the insight that the client wasn't getting it. And then also number 3, I'm a believer that with communication, the meaning of communication is the response you get. and the ownership is on you to alter how you're communicating to make sure your message is landing appropriately. So my engineer didn't have any of those three things from an awareness perspective. He was automatically running that, like I talked about, that program that basically said, oh, users are stupid, clients are stupid, they just don't get it. And the program just executed and he didn't change anything. So from an awareness perspective, that's what I'm referring to.
So it makes you stop, get some situational awareness of how people are receiving you, and then for you to adjust your communication style based on that.
Yep, that's part of it. And it's awareness of, we all have, like in communication, we have these triggers where somebody will say something or will hear something or someone will look at us a certain way, and we automatically just run this program. And before we know it, we've already reacted to whatever was said without the awareness that there was a trigger that happened that caused us to react in a way that's often not serving us. It's often making the situation worse or not contributing in a valuable manner. So having the awareness that when somebody says something or does something or whatever, I need to be able to like realize, is my response just on autopilot because of some like trauma from back in the day that I just like automatically respond this way, or is it intentional?
Sounds like one of those things that's easier said than done. So when you're not in the moment, it's very easy to say, okay, I have to be aware. But when you're in the moment, do you have any tips on being aware when you're in the moment, in the thick of things?
Take some time and before you respond. It's simple, but it's not easy, like you said. And even me, I have this trigger where if people ask me a lot of questions, like my partner, she asks me a lot of questions. Sometimes I'll start getting upset or defensive after, or taking the questions personally. And I find if I don't like set the intention as soon as I hear the initial question, I just like that program just starts running and I automatically start getting, taking it personally and getting upset. And then the overall conversation goes horribly, right? So I need to like, as immediately as I hear something, like kind of step back, zoom out and set the intention. Like, what do I want out of this conversation here? And what is the end result? And I need to alter my behavior to get that. That's kind of what I do.
Okay, that's interesting. And the next step is mindset, I believe, right?
That's correct. Yeah, step 2 is mindset. Mm-hmm.
So how does that fit into the awareness?
Yeah, good question. And all the 7 steps tie together. So step 2 is mindset. Basically, there's 2 types of mindset. There's a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. If you have a fixed mindset, you effectively believe that you are just the way you are, that you can't change. A lot of people in cybersecurity adopt a fixed mindset. They will say, I'm just not good with people. And as long as you keep telling yourself that, you're not ever going to be good with people. So that's a fixed mindset. With a growth mindset, you don't believe your brain is hardwired or those neural pathways are hardwired. You believe in neuroplasticity, that you can rewire your brain, form new habits, form new patterns, shift your identity, and all the things that we've been taught aren't possible, really. They are possible. But we like to tell ourselves limitations, and the more that we tell ourselves we can't do something, the more likely we're not going to be able to do it. So a fixed mindset would be, like with my engineer in that situation, if you have a fixed mindset, you see an opportunity versus a problem, is one example. So my engineer, when he was telling me the client just didn't get it, instead of thinking this is just a problem, clients don't get things, if he had a growth mindset, he might have said, well, if they don't get it, maybe I can change how I communicate in a way that they do get it. So it's adopting as well. It's being able to say, to make the changes in a positive direction.
Okay, now beyond communication, when you have the mindset of something isn't possible, so obviously times that you're being too rigid and you need to figure out, okay, there's more than one solution to the issue, as opposed to the flip side of that where you end up wasting a lot of time because something isn't possible. So there's kind of like that fine line of figuring out when you're really hardwiring your mind to figure out to be flexible as opposed to being rigid.
Yeah, I think that's more persistence versus the growth mindset. With a growth mindset, you'll realize there may be some alternatives, or when you look at the problem differently. And I used to do pen testing, so I think trying to get the SQL injection to work and just keep going down the path, is persistence. But at some point, you have to zoom out and I think this is part of the growth mindset as well, zoom out and look at like, what are we really trying to accomplish here? If I keep going down this path, am I adding any value to the client, or have I gone down the path enough to show if I had more time, I could probably done this? And a hacker that may have more time than I was hired to do the pen test may have been able to do this, and here's the risk. So can I communicate the risk to the client in a meaningful way without having to waste a lot of time to prove that I can actually get in there, right? So that's like stepping back and looking for an opportunity versus kind of brute forcing the method to get that end result, where you may be able to communicate the end result a little bit differently to the client.
Yeah, that's a very good point. The zooming out to try to see the big picture and then recalibrating based on that is definitely key.
Yeah, exactly.
So what's the next step?
The next step is acknowledgement. So step 3 is acknowledgement, and this is something I've struggled with as a leader. You need to be able to acknowledge other people, and like for myself, with my team, I realized that I had a hard time acknowledging myself. I do like very difficult things, and I would always be on like to the next thing. Like I do an Ironman triathlon, which is pretty hard to finish. And without it, as soon as I finish, I'll be thinking about the next thing I'm going to do instead of taking a moment to like say, that was pretty cool. I should acknowledge myself. And what I realized is because I had trouble acknowledging myself, I had difficulty acknowledging my team. And people want to be understood and appreciated. So if people don't feel appreciated at work, even the pen tester is doing something highly technical and is challenging in cybersecurity because a lot of people don't understand what people do. If they don't feel appreciated, they may go elsewhere. People rarely leave a job for just money, is typically they don't feel valued, right? So I think acknowledgement is extremely important. And when you're taking somebody through this journey, or you're going through this journey yourself, you're not going to like instantly improve on your awareness. So you need to like, pat yourself on the back if you make some progress. Otherwise, you'll get frustrated and just quit, right? So it all ties into that.
And you say the first step would be giving space for your own accomplishments in order to be able to acknowledge others.
Yeah. I think with leadership, we have to lead ourselves before we can lead other people effectively. And there's leadership opportunities all around. People think you have to have this team to lead, though. But it's leading yourself. If you're in a situation with your family, you can acknowledge them as well. This is not just at work. So it does start with yourself, though, because once you're better at doing it yourself, you can be better at doing it for other people.
Okay, yeah, that's a very interesting point. I mean, if you can't acknowledge yourself, then you will definitely have difficulty acknowledging other people's accomplishments.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, and then the next step is communications, right?
That's correct. Step 4 is communication. I talk about NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, in the book quite a bit, and one of the NLP presuppositions is that the meaning of communication is the response you get. So a lot of people don't look at it from that perspective. They just get frustrated, especially in cybersecurity, because the users don't understand, management doesn't understand, we're not getting the budget we asked for. So you're basically putting the blame on everybody else versus altering how you communicate. And I'm a believer that the ownership is on you to change how you communicate if you're not getting the response you want. And if I'm not communicating to the board of directors properly, who are responsible for giving me a budget, I need to change the method I'm communicating and maybe change my communication in terms that they understand. But in cybersecurity, we often don't do this. We just try the same thing over and over and expect a different result. And I'm a believer, in NLP, there's this thing called the C and E equation, the cause and the effect equation. And you want to be living at cause, meaning your C is greater than E. You create the environment around you versus you're living at the effect of the environment around you. So from a communication perspective, if you keep that in mind, which is basically the same as ownership, then you'll realize that you can alter how you communicate. It's on you, not on the other person.
Okay, and then from a tactical standpoint, though, when you're communicating, so you're trying to communicate a risk and it's not working, are there any specific pointers that you would suggest to try if let's say approach A isn't working, then approach B would be the next step? Are there any tactical tips that you can give for that?
Yeah, when you're communicating with someone, one of the challenges we often have is we're not really listening. We're always like preoccupied, and this is the next step. I'll talk about it here in a minute, but we're typically multitasking. So we're not listening for insight. People are always telling us everything about them by how they communicate. And if we're listening for that insight, instead of like most of us just listen for agreement, but if we're listening for the insight, then we'll have some idea of what method might work with a person. So if someone is using, let's say they're using certain phrases like, I have a grip on that, I have a grasp on that, I can feel that, then that person is like kinesthetic, for instance. So when I'm communicating to them, I can use more kinesthetic terms because that will resonate with that person better than somebody that might be visual, which could say, they would say something like, I see that, or I can picture that. So I would use more visual terms if I hear someone communicate that way.
What's a kinesthetic term versus a visual term?
Kinesthetic is like feeling or touch.
No, but how would you, let's say you're trying to explain a risk for a certain vulnerability. How would you do that in a kinesthetic way?
Okay, so if I'm explaining a risk for a specific vulnerability, I would, and there's the context missing right in the conversation, but I would see how what the person was saying. And if they're saying that they talk about feeling a lot, then I would maybe say, if this risk was exploited because it's severe, and here's the impact, how would that make you feel, or your organization overall feel, from if this were exploited? So I would use sort of the same terms back to them versus here's the risk and here's the impact. I would explain it in the way that they've communicated to me, like means something to them.
Okay, so it's not using an analogy that fits a specific communication type. It is essentially mirroring the terms that they use. So as kinesthetic, would it be like a group of terms, and then you just use one of those communication back to them?
Yeah. And that's another, like matching and mirroring are good for communication. If somebody uses a certain speech pattern, if you communicate back with a similar words, like if they like to use the word execute, like when they want to execute a task, if you use execute back, that's going to land more with them than if you use something different, because that's their model of the world, right? They're kinesthetic and they use words like execute. And this is just one area, right? But really, you have to be listening to even understand like how to weave these things in there, right? Because otherwise you're going to miss that these things even exist.
Yes, and definitely want to pepper them in the right cadence and not overdo it, and that otherwise it can backfire.
Yeah, and the other thing is understanding when you come into the conversation what the outcome you're seeking. A lot of us just show up to a meeting and we just start talking, and then the meeting's over and we're like, what happened, right? But if we show up with the right intention, like if I'm going to debrief a client on a penetration test, if I show up saying, these are the top 3 things I want to get across, and I want to make sure they understand them. I want to make sure they understand the risk, how to remediate it, and how to contact us if they need help with remediation. Those are the 3 outcomes I want from this meeting. And if I show up with that, then I've already set my intention, and I'm going to more than likely have that happen, which will drive the conversation versus just sort of showing up and hoping something happens in the way you want it to. So that's another tip that I use.
Okay, yeah, but that takes a lot more effort, though, I guess, especially for unplanned meetings, spontaneous meetings that you haven't had the time to kind of pre-plan what you want to get out of them for. But yeah, it's definitely, when it can be done, it can be very powerful.
Well, even in an unplanned meeting, because I don't really like unplanned meetings too much, but one of the things I typically ask is like, okay, what are we hoping to get out of this meeting? Because it's unplanned. I just want to make sure everyone's on the same page. So what are we hoping to get out of this meeting? And then that allows more clarity in the conversation. So we're not drifting on the wrong direction, and we're making sure we're driving towards the outcome. It doesn't always happen, obviously, but that's the intention.
You mentioned monotasking versus multitasking. Can you drill down into that a bit?
Monotasking is focusing on one thing at a time. And multitasking is obviously doing everything at once, which we've been brainwashed to do. Like, I'd be checking my text messages, checking Slack, checking email, trying to write a report, trying to do a pen test. And it's horribly inefficient because we have to do context switching and remember where we were on the previous task. when we go to the next one and remember how to pick it back up. And there's a bunch of wasted time there. And there's really two reasons to monotask, two primary reasons. One of them is the productivity I just referred to. The other one is presence. So we talked about communication. If I am communicating, but I'm multitasking, I'm thinking about something else, or I'm checking my phone or my email, then I'm not going to be present and I'm not going to be listening and getting that insight that the person was giving me, right? I talked about how to alter your communication, but you have to have the insight from the person. And that's often missed because we're multitasking. We've been brainwashed to think multitasking is the thing to do. A lot of people put it on their resume that they're a great multitasker. And to me, that's like a major red flag. It means you're really busy, but you're not very productive typically. You're not a very good listener because you're always going to be doing something else. So yeah, we should be doing monotasking. And one of the things for monotasking I'm an advocate of is block time. So using blocks of time on your calendar where you only do one thing. So if I'm writing a pen test report, let's say between 9 a.m. and 10 a.m., I blocked it off my calendar and that's all I do. I don't check email. I don't check my text messages. I don't check, Teams or Slack or anything else. I just do the report. And that'll make you way more productive and way less stressed. Because one of the reasons a lot of people are stressed is they feel like they have to try to do everything at once. And at the end of the day, they're like, wow, the whole day went by, but I didn't really get anything done. So that's because they're multitasking.
That would seem like in a conversation, though, you'd have to have a lot of presence of mind to be able to focus and not start multitasking while writing a report could be easier than multitasking during a conversation when other thoughts or priorities pop into your head.
Possibly. I think it's extremely important, though, when you're having a conversation to monotask and be present as best you can. Because then and this is something like, sometimes you'll drift off and think about something else, but you have to bring yourself back, right? Because otherwise, we're not getting that insight from the person, and we're not giving them the respect that the person deserves, and we're just wasting time. Because I've been in many, and you have too, I'm sure, you've been in many meetings where somebody's called upon, and they act like you just woke them up, and they like, oh, what did you ask me? And it's like this waste of time, right? Because they're not present in the meeting. It's just like, it makes the meeting like twice as long, and you have to repeat stuff, and that kind of stuff drives me crazy. It's horribly inefficient, and it's tolerated a lot, which is another issue.
Yeah, definitely. So after monotasking is empathy, right?
Correct. Yeah, empathy.
Okay, and this seems like a hard one easy one to talk about, hard one to implement.
Yes, and this is a major challenge in cybersecurity. But empathy, from my perspective, is focusing on our similarities. We tend to like to focus on our differences because everybody wants to be significant, and how we get significance typically is by being different or unique, right? So it's this weird paradox. We want to focus on being empathetic in what we have in similar, but we also want to be significant in what we have different than other people. And in cybersecurity and a lot of technical industries, we tend to primarily focus on our differences. Like, we're smarter than other people. We have this special vernacular where we talk with this specific acronyms and nobody else understands us, and it's like a subculture. So we feel significant, but that doesn't drive empathy. So with empathy, we need to focus on our similarities and the human condition. We all have, this human condition in general. We've all had, similar struggles with, relationships, with communication, with, our health. We all have these things in common, but we tend to forget that. And if you're only focused on the differences, which the media and the politicians like to focus on as well, then we're not going to be empathetic to our fellow people. And from a cybersecurity perspective, with empathy, a lot of it's perspective taking. So if I'm the penetration tester, like we've been talking about, and I'm talking to a client, if you don't ever step back and put yourselves in the client's shoes, for instance, it's hard to be empathetic. And that's where the similarities come in. Because you're telling the client all the ways a hacker can get into their environment. This might be the IT manager that reports to somebody, and they may have told the person they report to that they have a good handle on it. And now you're telling them there's all these holes. So they're kind of freaking out about it, right? So it's good to have some perspective. So it helps with the communication as well. And there's really two types of empathy. And I think this is where a lot of people get kind of mixed up. There's cognitive empathy, which is what I just described, taking the perspective of someone else. And there's affective empathy, which is where you like feel the same as somebody else. We don't really need to have affective empathy, because to be an effective leader, you want to have high cognitive empathy but low affective empathy. You want to be able to take someone else's perspective but not, get overly emotional about the situation.
All right, what's the last step?
The last step is Kaizen. Kaizen basically means continuous and never-ending improvement. The idea is with anything we do, like the 7 steps or anything in life, sometimes we don't want to take the first step because we feel like everything has to be perfect. But if we embrace this concept of Kaizen, we realize if we take the first step and we mess something up, that's okay, because we're just going to keep improving on it. And it's important to do root cause analysis to figure out what to improve, though. A lot of us will improve the symptoms versus the root cause, and we won't actually make progress, though. And I talk about the root cause analysis in the book. And in cybersecurity, and this is why I wrote the book, we keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. We keep coming up with better technology, better frameworks, but we still get hacked like every day. And every day there's a bigger hack announced on the news. So the people skills is one area we've largely neglected, which is why I wrote the book. And we need to figure out what the root issues are and improve them.
So figure out why, when you take the first step, figure out why something failed, and then just improvise or iterate on that to keep on trying.
Yeah, but have the courage to take the first step, right? Because perfection is like the enemy of execution. A lot of us think everything should be perfect before we take the first step. But if we practice Kaizen, we'll take the first step, realizing it may be in the wrong direction. But then we'll figure out, I know that direction is not it, so I can go this direction, for instance.
Is Kaizen your own acronym, or is that a known acronym?
Oh, Kaizen is it's a Japanese word. I think it's big in the Japanese car manufacturing back in the day, where they always wanted to improve, like Honda and Toyota, their vehicles, to the point where each production they made improvements, so the next one. So eventually all the problems got solved, and you had the near perfect car basically. But when if you went back to the first car, it wasn't perfect, but they kept making the improvements. Oh, this didn't work, or there's an improvement on here. And eventually the overall thing got pretty good.
Who's the target audience for the book?
The target audience is technical leaders. So I wrote the book. It's really for anyone in general, right? But I targeted it towards technical leaders, or CEOs of a company, or CIOs or CISOs that have a technical team. And I figured that they would be more open to the topic than the technical people themselves, because technical people don't like to be educated, or they think they already have everything figured out. So the book is really for everybody, but I targeted it specifically because I felt like it'd be more a receptive audience to leaders. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So if people want to learn more about you, where can they find you?
Yeah, they can find me on my website, christianespinosa.com, or on LinkedIn. That's a good one as well.
Awesome. Great. And the book is called?
The book is called The Smartest Person in the Room: The Root Cause and New Solution for Cybersecurity, and they can find that on Amazon.
And Audible.
In Audible, yeah. Yep. I had Kaleo Griffith narrate the Audible one. He's awesome. It's really good.
Cool. All right. Christian, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you, Josh.
All right, that's it for this week. Thanks again for listening and leaving reviews. If you have any comments or questions, I'd love to hear from you. I'm at Jamoose on Twitter, or drop me an email at podcast@breachsense.io. And if you're part of a security team that needs visibility into your employees, customers, or third-party suppliers' breach credentials before criminals exploit them, head on over to breachsense.io to apply for a free 7-day trial. That's it for this week, and I'll be back in your earbuds next Thursday morning.